right, Roger, would you like to begin?
Chiwiliwan. Ida. Chigigwison. Nagagiti ni Wescoman. Gamajuliwan etiwogiska. Gamajnan as well to multiban. Eliud Bejipit, see there when. Noli has old even Eli Gazelman Gawalanke would see the Knijonic. We joke Gemine. Would you get a joke and move it Schwabanaki? Naga seeded a Moskitino. Naga go it Pinwinen. Would you get a Woldock Hadio? Nagan we joke him on and see the Bamos we know. Nagap see the get Bemouse wig. Kabidena, see the get Bemouse wig pen. Chivoli when Eli Milia Bemouse wog and Bemkiskak. Gamajinal as well to multiban. Need lay just Camille. Williwan Mishi.
Williwan, Roger. Roger, would you like to introduce yourself?
Dan gok, see that when? Roger Paul Nildly Wiz. No jail Madoc Miguk. No da Bex Nil Chwabanakig. My name is Roger Paul, and I come from Madockamigug. It's a Passamaquoddy community, what's known as Down East Maine now. My family comes from Chwabanakig, which is mostly in the Maritimes of Canada and what's now known as New England. I'm a Wabanaki languages teacher on the Penobscot Indian Nation and at Indian Island School. I teach languages there, and I also teach at the University of Maine at Orono, and also on the USM campus in Portland. And I get to be very fortunate to hang out with people like Mishi. So thank you for welcoming me.
Thank you so much, Roger. Roger is also faculty at the Upstander Academy, which we can talk about a little bit later. I'm Mishi Lesser. I am a co-founder of Boston-based Upstander Project. I'm speaking to you from my home office in the land of the Pequasit Band of the Massachusetts tribe, a place they called Pigsgusset, currently known as Watertown in the state of Massachusetts. I am a settler here, an uninvited guest on Indigenous land, and one of the ways I deal with that fact is by teaching teachers about the disavowed history of these lands that Roger has taught me. I hope I pronounce correctly, Chuaponekik. How did I do, Roger?
That sounded great.
Okay. We are both very grateful to each of you for joining us today, and we hope that our presentation is worth your time. The themes we're going to talk about today would merit a semester-long course. So really all we can do is introduce a series of themes and concepts and give you resources that you can use in your classroom. Both Roger and I are more than happy to be available to you as you bring these forward. So some of the questions we want to address during this short presentation are the following. Who confers citizenship? Citizenship belongs to a hierarchical method or model of governance. It's not, to make a pun, it's not indigenous to indigenous peoples. And yet there is something called dual citizenship. Indigenous people are citizens of tribal nations and also citizens of United States. So we want to talk about that a little bit. We think it's really important for your students to know that. It's one of the ways that we begin to help them understand that Indigenous peoples are not in the past. They're very much in the present. They are our teachers, our neighbors, our students, our families. We also want to contrast citizenship and kinship ties. because kinship for Indigenous peoples is thousands of years old, much older than citizenship, which belongs to the nation state, and is really a tool of control by nation states. So we just want to talk a bit about this notion of sovereignty. And one of the things that I have learned from Roger and other Indigenous scholars and teachers and friends is that the very word sovereignty is projected onto Indigenous peoples. There is no word in most Indigenous languages for sovereignty. Sovereignty is about the authority of a state to govern itself and engage in international relationships. It's a Eurocentric concept that does not, that comes from settler colonialism. And it is projected onto Indigenous societies through its different manifestations, whether it's the federal government or state governments. And yet, Indigenous people talk about the erosion of tribal sovereignty. So there's a paradox here. It's an imposed foreign concept, and yet when the government tries to take it away, Indigenous peoples mobilize and some protest. So I'll just say that tribal citizens have a political relationship with their tribe, which is not based on race. And this is something we should perhaps dwell on. Roger can address in his comments. But Indigenous peoples have taught me that they are not fighting for racial equality because they are not a race, just like other ethnic groups. I'm Jewish. Jews are not a race. That is not a helpful concept in the Jewish community. So among tribal peoples, it's really about kinship ties and the fact that tribes are political entities. So Roger, I will hand it over to you to talk about nation to nation relationships.
Lewin. Yeah, individual tribes have a nation to nation relationship within the United States. And we actually have established them with treaties, many different treaties signed with the United States. These treaties, there's some say 370, some say over 500. To the tribal people, it really doesn't matter the number of treaties that we've entered into. What really matters is the number of treaties that they have actually lived up to. The tribal sovereignty is derived from the people. The people of the communities decide. Tribal sovereignty is derived from the land because the resources of the land decide what the kinship is of those people. And the kinship ties, when we go from community to community, we are basically one community that are in various places. And it's not a gift that any external government has brought to us and given to us. And as mentioned before, it's not even in our language here in the Northeast. It's definitely not our concept. Now, these treaties that we enter into them, and that's where a lot of the stereotypical, they smoke the peace pipe over it. The pipe to us is a very sacred, I don't even want to call it a tool, but it's a very sacred item that we use to seal the truth and the agreement that we have with other people. And whenever we meet and we go into council and we bring the sacred pipe in, we honor all of the treaties we make, and our generations honor that. Our following generations honor that. So sovereignty to us is something completely different. And one of our words in our language, actually, the word is ginchemis. Ginchemis comes from one of the first attempts to impose sovereignty on our people. We were told that King James has allowed us all to be subjects, loyal subjects now of King James. And our people didn't understand or couldn't say the word King James. So when we looked at one another and we asked each other, and they said, Ginchemus, yeah. In our language, that word Ginchemus is an indigenization of King James, which actually means to us today that it's somebody who thinks they're in charge, but they're not. It was their first attempt to impose sovereignty on our people, and we kind of laughed and joked about it. And so this is something new to us. And each one of our nations, we're not all one people. I do want to remind everyone that we are not one Indian, or they call it Native American people. And even that in itself imposes sovereignty, that we're a hyphenated American, that the idea of American is just the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant settler who came, but yet everyone else is hyphenated from that. I don't really agree with the concept of Native American. I actually prefer Indian over that. If I had my druthers, it would be Skitchin, surface dweller. So to us, whenever we talk about sovereignty, it's a concept that we're still dealing with, and we don't really understand what the sovereignty is for the dominant American culture, because that's a goalpost that keeps getting moved, especially in today's world. Yeah. So, Mishi, I'll hand it back to you. Williwan.
Thank you, Roger. So right here, with what Roger has shared with us, we can see that treaties have a certain meaning in Indigenous societies. And then if we look at the US Constitution, Article 6, Clause 2, we see that treaties shall be the supreme law of the land. And yet, this is something we think it's really important for students to understand. Even though treaties are an essential component of the US Constitution, most have been broken between the United States and Indigenous peoples. From 1778 to 1871, the government of the United States entered into more than 500 treaties with Indigenous tribes, and all have been violated in some way or broken by the US government. So, in spite of hundreds of treaties, we wanted to talk about attacks on some of the Indigenous rights that Native people hold most dear and that are very consequential to what we will be discussing in a little while, which is the forced removal and the coerced assimilation of Indigenous children by state child welfare systems in violation of the Indian Child Welfare Act of 1978. So Roger, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about attacks on, we refer to the Indian Child Welfare Act as ICWA, and maybe if you could just briefly share your personal story, Roger, about how your relatives protected you from violations of ICWA?
Lewin, I can share that, but with a precursor, forgive me if I slow down, because this is something very near and dear to my heart. And so I may sound like I get emotional during this, which is true, I probably am. But when we talk about ICWA, we're talking about the Indian Child Welfare Act, which was established in 1978. And that was to allow our people to help stop the cultural genocide of our people and our kinships. 35% of our children were being removed from their families and placed in foster homes at that time. And 85% of those were placed in non-Native families outside the community. Now, these social workers that identified who was being taken and who warranted being taken. They were utilizing their imposed belief system on our culture, on who they thought would go. I sit here myself in a very privileged place to say that I was sheltered from this criminal policy. Two of my older brothers and one of my older sisters were taken and they were sent to Catholic residential school. I come from a family of a very large family of about 19 of us. And the older brothers and sisters, when they were teens, young teens, they were taken by the authorities and forced to go to Catholic school. And after that realization, my dad at the time was in Canada. This was even before I was born, moved to Maine and they began to have children in Maine where they would be safer, because Maine under the US government was so far north and so secluded that a lot of times they didn't reach that far north. Whereas in Canada, it was very populated with loyalists, the ones still loyal to the British Crown, and very, very, very big on the Catholic religion and training Indian people to be non-Indians. And so when we moved to the Maine and I was born, the authorities started realizing, and I was born on the community, not in a hospital. So it was very safe for me not to be known by the authorities. A lot of my family were born within the community with midwives to protect us. And as soon as authorities would get closer and want to take the children, we would move to another community. Our communities are Wolastoqey, Naga, Chkopanake, Beskidamukare, many different communities that they claim are different reservations of different groups of people. We're all one family. We're just identified by different places. So I would have family on almost every community in the surrounding area. And I would be shuttled between Canada and the United States if the authorities got too close. And sometimes I was even shuttled to Connecticut to live with my older siblings, and sometimes back into Canada to live with my uncle and not the original aunt and uncle who had watched me the last time. My family all pulled together to save us younger ones from what they had to go through, the older ones. We don't really have the time to go through some of that, and I'm glad we don't, but I am very thankful that my family and my many communities, and it wasn't just my family who did it, it was the entire community would pull together to protect the children.
Thank you, Roger. So the law that was supposed to prevent Indigenous children from being taken away was violated by states and continues to be violated by many states all over the US. The film Dawnla, which you will see in a little while, will fill in some of the background as to how it was that Maine violated that law and why a Truth and Reconciliation Commission was created to address all the harm that was being done. But that law, with all of its imperfections, is under attack right now. And there's enormous concern in Indigenous communities that an attack on the Indian Child Welfare Act is also an attack on sovereignty. And this goes back to the paradox that I mentioned earlier. Indigenous communities don't love the word sovereignty, but don't attack it because it erodes important rights that people have fought for. So on our next slide, we want to talk about citizens, sovereigns, and soldiers. And Roger, so that we don't go off our time, maybe we'll try to keep this brief and answer this question about why Native people serve in the armed forces at such a high rate, higher than any other demographic group. Would you like to speak to that?
Yes, I can. It's actually it uh, works from. It's a good transition from the ICWA and from the taking of children, the and the Religious Freedom Act of the United States. It was against the law for us to practice our cultures. It was against rules for us in public and in schools to speak our language. And we weren't allowed to go through our ceremonies. We have various ceremonies that go through life, much like other people have ceremonies that go from adulthood, from childhood to adulthood. There were boundaries that you know when you are ready for the next part of your life. We had that coming of age ceremony for the men, which became against the law. And a lot of times, the younger men, in order for them to be able to go through this ceremony, the only thing legal for us to do, and we did do some ceremonies after dark behind closed doors, but a lot of times they would join the military. And my personal reason, a lot of the community where I came from, the Passamaquoddy community, we were in an area where they would not hire us. So a young Indigenous male could not find a job in the local area. And so a lot of times, if a young Indigenous male was old enough to try to make a life of their own and gain employment, be gainfully employed, the only place that would hire an Indian at the time was the military. So from that, we had a lot of our men, a lot of our younger men, very large percentage of us joined the military, not because we were loyal to the U.S. government, and only because that was really the only job we had. And for some of us, the elders let us go, and they said that is your ceremony that will help you become the person that you need to be.
Thank you. Thank you, Roger. So we want to make sure that those of you who have chosen to be with us understand that Native societies inhabit physical, spiritual, emotional, and social landscapes that are profoundly different than the ones that those of us like myself who are non-Native inhabit. And Roger, there's just a beautiful way that you shared with me once that an elder had expressed to you about that it's like visiting your neighbor and deciding to move in. Can you briefly share that with those who are with us?
Oh, definitely. I still kind of snicker at what that elder sometimes, when we speak, he sometimes tries to put things into simple perspectives for me to understand. And the elder told me one time about the colonizers when they came. He said it's like visiting your neighbor. And they had come to visit us, and when they came to visit us, they decided to move in. And they slowly took over our house. But they did give us a closet to live in our own house. And first, they wouldn't let us leave the closet. That term that everyone heard about, that Indian is off the reservation. It was legal to shoot Indians if they left their Indian reservations, the closets or the land reserved only for Skijinoog. At first, they wouldn't let us out of the closet. They wouldn't let us live anywhere but there, but yet they complained about us. And they complained how unfit we were as parents by only allowing our children to live in a closet, which was good fodder for them to take children from us. Eventually, they grow to see the hypocrisy in that. And then they call themselves open-minded and let us venture out of the closets that they let us live in. But yet they force us to live in the way that they see fit. And they prevent us from using our own lands, our own places of worship, the way that we've always done it. And we have to have express permission now from the federal governments to utilize our own lands, to do our own ceremonies, and to actually live the way we've always lived. And I remember sitting with that elder, thinking about it in that perspective, and I thought I had never thought of it that way, but it does make a lot of sense.
Thank you, Roger. And you can see on this slide, the back of the woman's t-shirt says rematriate the land. You will likely be hearing more and more about projects that aim to rematriate the land because it's happening all over United States and throughout the world. Native peoples are trying to enter into relationships with settlers like me. I'm not a landowner, but if I were, perhaps there would be a conversation about whether land can be given back, whether land can be shared, whether natural resources can be harvested or hunted on land. It's a gigantic conversation that's happening right now between Indigenous peoples, landowners, land conservation representatives. Yeah. So in this next slide, we want to just sort of open the conversation up to this great paradox. While Native rights are threatened here in the US, people from all over this hemisphere, many of whom are Indigenous, have struggled to come here, and yet many of them have been caged at the border or separated from their families. And it's one thing we'd like you to take away from this conversation is that the taking away of children, as Roger described in his own family, is part of a continuum across 4 centuries. So settler societies have been violating and abusing their power, targeting Native families in a variety of ways. It started with enslavement. It's frustrating that we can't see your faces because I don't know if those of you who are with us know that between 2.5 and 5 million Indigenous people were enslaved in what became the United States. It's often overlooked or ignored. But so we have enslavement, we have indentured servitude of Indigenous children after military skirmishes and wars. And then we have the boarding schools and the adoption of Indigenous children, which was actually a way that the private adoption industry gained enormous private assets. And then we have the state child welfare systems fostering children. So it's to us, it's a great paradox. Roger is going to speak for a few minutes about language recovery as survivance. And there are just a few bullets on this slide. And after that, we're going to invite you to watch Dawnland.
Williwan, the language of our people, it's actually, it helps us form relationships with one another as humans. It helps us form the relationships with the land. And all of creation that we talk about is our language describes from the perspective of ourselves and our relationship with creation. I know the English language is a noun-oriented language where a lot of things are persons, places, or things. And they're very good at labeling things, and they're very good at labeling people even. And they have labels for everything. There's a noun for almost everything in the English language. We're very noun poor. We don't have a lot of nouns in our language. We do have a lot of verbs. And when we describe something, our language is very, very polysynthetic. We stem from the verb, our relationship with something out there. We don't have nouns, so we can't say it's a thing. We can say our relationship with that. And that's how we tend to describe the world around us. Now, it identifies our roles and responsibilities. And in some of our words, it identifies what our responsibilities are to other people. For instance, our word for elder is Kijiji twin. And to us, that would be what English would call an elder. But in our language, it literally means the one who knows. Words like dus and gus are words that describe children in our community younger than us, of the generations after us. And dus literally means my daughter. Gus literally means my son. Even though we're not biologically their parents, we as a community are responsible for that child as though it were our own, because it's in part of our community. We don't have a lot of words that identify man or woman. It's not needed in our common language. We don't have pronouns like him or her. Negum usually refers to male or female. Also could refer to any animate object or animate animal. We consider ourselves part of creation, and we don't consider ourselves male and female. We do have words if we need to identify certain, specifically a male or a female, but we rarely ever use them. That's not anything important to us. Our language has been under attack for many generations, and our elders say that when we lose our language, we lose our identity of who we are and the instructions of how we need to be with all of creation. And that includes humans, non-humans, anything in this world that is created. We have a responsibility to that. And that's all part of our language. And so we need to keep our languages. This ICWA is helping to save our languages so that we continue to speak. I was very fortunate and didn't have to learn to speak English until I was 6 years old and had to start going to school. And Sister Jean Marie forced us to learn English. And I'm fortunate enough to be still a speaker of my language. So language recovery is essential to us remaining who we are as a people and who we are responsible to.
Thank you, Roger. And Roger is very modest, but he just earned a master's in linguistics from MIT. Roger, we got a couple of questions in the chat, but we can't take a whole lot of time right now. So if we could just let Allison and Sarah know that we're going to come back to your questions. I hope that's okay with you. Roger, are you able to see the questions that came in the chat? One
no.
person. Okay, I'll read.
Okay, I found them. Yes, I see them now.
Yeah. So is it okay if we come back to them during the Q&A?
Oh, it's fine. Yes.
Okay. So friends, I want to just say a couple of things about Dawnland before. Sorry, my slides just keep hopping. It's like I look at them and they hop. Forgive me, folks. So Dawnland is an Emmy Award winning film. We actually won an Emmy for Outstanding Research in 2018. The film is about the Maine Wabanaki State Child Welfare Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the larger issue of the forced removal and coerced assimilation of Indigenous children through an abuse of state power. The image on this slide is the front page of the Indian Child Welfare Act. And it's important to know and to share with your students that that law was really born out of pain and advocacy, mostly by Indigenous women. The opening scene of Dawnland is in the US Senate. The year is 1974. And 4 years after, women gave testimony about the ways in which the social workers took away their children, a law was passed. And that law, ICWA, is now actually under attack. We can talk about the reason that's being used uh, the the perverse, in my opinion, argument used to attack it after you watch the film, if you like. But suffice it to say, there are two versions of Dawnland. One is the one you'll see, which was on public television, viewed by well over 2 million people. But there's also an 86-minute version of the film. So if anybody is interested in seeing that fuller version, please get in touch with us at upstanderproject.org. There is a 12-lesson teacher's guide, which I don't know if you can see. I'm holding it up right now to the camera, that accompanies Dawnland. And I wrote it primarily for those of us who are non-native, who grew up knowing only one version of history, what I've come to understand as the view from the boat. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a view from the shore until we began work on this about 8 years ago. So I don't want to take up more time right now talking about the film. I'd like you to look in the chat. Nate is very kindly placing the Vimeo link in the chat. If you've written down somewhere this Zoom link, you can close out of Zoom now, hop over to Vimeo, and then come back here after you watch the 54-minute version of Dawnland so that we can have a Q&A. How does that sound, folks? If anybody wants to write something in the chat to let us know that this is clear, we would appreciate it. Nothing in the chat. Okay, you'll try it. Allison, so you're saying you won't join us, but before you leave, you wanted to know how Nijemis was spelled. Roger, if you want to just dictate that to me, I'll put it in the chat for Allison because she's leaving us.
Oh, I can do that right from chat here, Mishi.
Okay, good.
I think I got it in there correctly. I'm going to send it out to everyone. I just noticed I don't have it to everyone.
Yes, please.
There we go.
Ah, okay, sure. King James, Quincemas, I love it. All right, folks, please watch Dawnland and come back to us in 54 minutes.
Hey, we just lost power.
Ooh, yeah.
Oh no.
She lost power too. I just got the message that she had lost power.
Yeah. So, but thank you for sharing the documentary with us. Oops.
Are there storms down in that area?
Yes, it's really windy.
Oh my goodness.
It just started raining. Maybe before I hop off, you can answer my question.
I'd love to. I'd love to.
Okay. It was a question about, you mentioned that you had to have certain permissions for certain activities.
Yes. This was when I was younger, before, what was it? I think it was 1967, before the Indian Rights Act came out. We wouldn't even be allowed to do ceremonies on the reservation. We couldn't even leave the reservation without having a good reason. And they had an Indian agent, they called it. It was a non-native person who was assigned to watch over us. And it was almost like a paternal relationship with the state. And he had to approve everything that we wanted to do, even hunting, as a matter of fact. he
Wow.
had to go with the hunters to make sure we didn't kill everything in sight. And
Oh, God.
we just kind of shook our heads and realized that, wait a minute, your hunting laws were based on our traditional ways, and their fishing rights were based on our traditional ways. And it was after the Indian Rights Act, I think of 1967, is when they finally allowed us to be able to leave the reservation. Matter of fact, it was I think 2012 or somewhere around there where it was finally legal for the city of Boston to allow an Indian to walk the streets. It became illegal since Boston at the time was where treaties were being kept for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts years ago when they were forming. The Commonwealth would come to our communities, get someone drunk, bring them to Boston, and then have them sign and say they represented the tribe. And then when our actual delegation went to go and argue that, the city made it illegal for Indians to walk the streets uninvited. And that was never even taken off the books until I think they found it in 2012. And so
Wow.
even anyone that visited before 2012 was breaking the law. So there were
Yeah.
a lot of things that were when they did let us. That's the kind of the story where they let us out of the closet and move within our own
Right. The
with our own
neighbors, yeah.
home. After
Yeah.
that, then all of a sudden, anything off of our prisoner of war camp, reservation,
Yeah.
anything off of our reservation where we would normally go to the top of Mount Katahdin to do fasting, or we would go to do sunrise ceremonies on Cadillac Mountain in what was it? I forgot the name of that park down there in Bar Harbor.
Acadia.
Acadia, that one.
My parents live there.
Oh, we used to do sunrise ceremonies there because certain times of the year that hits the sun first in the United States. And so we would have to have permissions, and then we couldn't even have a sacred fire because we would have to have a fire permit, and we would have to follow the regulations that the fire department thought that was better. And it's like, well, no, we know this isn't our first movie. We know exactly what we're doing. So a lot of those, like for instance, the elver fishing. Elvers have been something we gathered for a long time, but only recently the price has really shot up to $2,000, sometimes $3,000 for a pound of elvers, which would be the glass eels, the baby eels.
Yeah.
And when that shot up, the state jumped right in and started regulating the industry. And we've been doing this for generations. I mean, our Beskidmokadi, our name is about a sea-bearing fish. I mean, a pollock. We have been fishing all of our lives. We're not the Dances with Wolves tribes up here. We're the Dances with Fish tribes. And but we've known for generations how to take care of a harvest without ruining future generations. And the state imposed a new law and said, no, you're going to do it our way. And the tribe said, no, we're not. We've been doing this for thousands of years. The elvers are still here. There's enough for everyone. You can do it how you want it and let us do it the way we want it. Well, the state took us to the federal fisheries regulators and proposed their case. The federal fisheries regulators looked at the state of Maine's case and said, you guys need to start doing it the way the tribes have been doing it. And so the state kind of came home, licked their wounds, and they're slowly adjusting their elver fishing laws to match the ones that the tribe have been doing for thousands of years. And it's these types of things that we've been doing this. We know what we're doing. Leave us alone. And you can do it the way you want it over there, but leave us alone. Hunting laws is another thing. The hunting. I don't know if you've read. I'm backing up to recently in Nova Scotia. The non-native fishermen are actually ramming and setting fire to the native fishing boats that are going out and trapping lobster.
No.
They see that as their territory. And even though there's only 5 indigenous boats out of the hundreds of licenses that are issued, they see the Indian people as a threat to their industry. And it's that John Wayne attitude toward our people that still is pervasive today. Even with the ICWA law, it's still that way today. I myself, a good example of today, my wife and I tried to be a foster home for children, children in general, because we did want to be a place, because there's almost no native foster homes that are licensed by the state.
Mhm.
And you can count on one hand in the entire state that are native foster homes that are licensed by the state. And I wanted to be one of them. And everything went great going through all of the hoops until we got to the fire inspection. And then they imposed with us future fire regulations that will be in effect before our license expires. So we have to follow these fire regulations that haven't even been adopted yet. But they said, well, your license will go for 2 years. We expect them to be adopted within the next 2 years. So we're going to have to impose these laws on you. And I've been to non-native homes. There was one trailer home that I could look down through the floor at the ground. That was a foster home. And I was just so enraged that I just walked out and I thought, you know what? I wanted to get part of the system and try to help. I don't want anything to do with that system any longer. It's against us. I'm sorry for such a long answer. I hope
No, thank you so much. I have to thank you from my heart. It was really, I don't want to say enjoyable, but I enjoyed the learning.
Enlightening is a good English word.
Yeah, enlightening is a good English word. Well, I knew some of it, but I hadn't seen the documentary, and it will make just thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you to the organizers. Okay.
And thank you for your question. Thank you for your interest in being here.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You're welcome. All right. Stay well.
I hope you get your power back soon.
Yeah. So far, no power.
Oh.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Roger, can you hear me?
Yes, I can
I
hear
just
you.
got back.
I can see your name and there's a spot saved for you on our screen. You've lost power, I'm told.
I think she might be trying to connect via phone.
Okay.
If I can.
I have a discount code for anyone that wants to buy Dear Georgina, which can tell you about a little bit more about I guess some of the stories of the people that were in the movie. And I'm going to go ahead and put it in the chat.
Thank you.
That way you can share it with anyone also.
Oh, welcome back, Michi.
There's
Oh,
Michi.
boy.
I was just about to put in the chat the discount code.
Nothing like a
Okay,
little
thank
adventure.
you. All right, well, not the presentation we were hoping. Kate, you were just about to say something, but now you're muted and I don't see you, so I wonder if you lost power as well.
I might be about to lose power.
Yeah, my connection is very unstable, so why don't you, let's try to get to your question really quick, if you can say what it was.
I didn't have any specific questions. I was saying before you lost power that Pat McQuillan had recommended your film to me a year ago. And so I saw you on the schedule.
Nate, the NERC 2025 is the correct code.
Thank you so much.
I had my finger on the shift button. Sorry.
Roger, do you do work with students in public schools?
Yes, well, I work with the K through 8 on Indian Island School.
Mm-hmm.
And I do some work with high school students in the area. There's no native language requirement for high school students, but some of the high schools are starting to actually participate.
Well, down where I live, I'm in Plymouth, ironically, of all places. But I know. But the Mashpee Wampanoags have been working for the last couple, I think almost 20, maybe a little bit more than 2 decades on reclaiming the language.
Oh, yes.
So it's a...
They're my heroes.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, they brought their language back from no one speaking it. There were no
Right.
speakers
Wow.
left.
Right.
The
Right.
language had essentially died.
Right.
And MIT had actually worked with some tribal people. Jessie Little Doe Baird, she's a council member there, and they convinced her to come back and do research with MIT to draw the language from its written form. Years ago, we never had a writing system, but when the Europeans came, their idea was to gather souls for the church. And so they wanted to convert all of us. Now, the ones that converted in the Wampanoag area were brilliant. Rather than have us like what Sister Jean Marie made us learn English and then go to catechism, excuse me, the Wampanoags had the reverends and the preachers learn the language so they could preach in the language. And then they were able to convert a lot of people to Christianity, not Catholicism, but Protestant Christianity. And they rewrote the entire Bible in Wampanoag.
Right.
And that is one of the major resources they had to draw from the language. And from the perspective of MIT being a colonizer perspective, they wanted an Indigenous perspective on these words. And so when Jessie Little Doe Baird went in to get her degree, she did the research with them. And then they were given a grant. She applied for a grant, and they had what they call the Wampanoag Language Reclamation Project. And there are fluent speakers of the language today. And
Wow.
it is wonderful. And it's like, wow. I actually went to school with Jessie's daughter, Tracy.
Wow.
And she is a teacher of the language, and she's a fluent speaker of Wampanoag.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, that tribe is my hero. They're my heroes.
That's great.
Of course, much like our culture, the women have kind of taken over it and have run the program. And boy, has it blossomed when they let the women take over. They know exactly what to do. Ironically, that's the first tribe supposedly in this area when they were forced here by a storm, and the company that brought the people here to come and settle were dumped there. They were actually supposed to go to Jamestown, but when the storm brought them ashore, the captain said, "Okay, get off. I brought you here. Wait a minute, we're supposed to go there. Nope, this is all you get. Sorry." And it's like, so they were set there, and they ended up having to communicate with the local people, and they did form alliances. Of course, that changed a bit later, but they did form good alliances. And the people there at Plymouth Rock were the ones that actually started to flourish because they depended on the surrounding communities to keep them alive. And it did well. And it was one of the first places where we welcomed the colonizers. Ironically now, the administration and the Bureau of Land Management is trying to negate their tribal reservation lands and say that, well, I can tell you the story from my perspective because I know the story behind the story. They want to expand on their golf courses, and they want to expand on their high tax properties. So some of the places where the reservation land was there reserved for the tribal people is actually being negated. And now they're having to fight to keep their lands. That ironically, the first tribe that the New England colonists ran into, So it's of course it's 2020. What else can you expect? I guess
Right. Well, I heard about this story in a book that I read recently by David Silverman called "This Land Is Their Land," and he talked about the language reclamation project. And in the high school in the town next to me, Mashpee, they actually teach the Wampanoag language as a high school foreign language course.
Ironic, it's called foreign language, isn't it?
Well, right, exactly. That is the ultimate irony. Absolutely.
Actually, that was something in the state of Maine as a Wabanaki languages teacher. The state keeps trying to get me to be a part of what they call FAME, Foreign Languages of Maine. And I said, well, I'm not going to be a foreign language. And they said, well, no, you're a language teacher. You teach Wabanaki languages. Yeah, I don't teach foreign languages. I said, I have never taught English in my life. And then they said, well, no. And now they're trying to rename it to classical languages. But I'm glad they listened, because I said, I'm not going to be a part of that. I don't teach a foreign language.
Have there been any, I know that there was the curriculum that Mishi put together with the film, but have there been things in the main social studies K-12 curriculum to try and get more understanding of this history into that context?
Well, of course, Mishi's curriculum is kind of the leader of the pack. That's the one that you want to go to. There is now a movement in Portland. The Portland Public Schools is trying to really connect and get some curriculum built. Now, there have been curriculums made within some of the tribal communities that we teach within the communities. But as far as social studies in general, there was a law passed. I think they still call it Bill LD 2 something. It's a bill that requires social studies to be taught in I think in the 6th grade area of Wabanaki history.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with that, the bill passed and everything passed wonderfully. There's no enforcement. And so there's schools can choose to teach it or choose not to.
And there's probably no teacher training.
There is teacher training available.
Okay, that's good.
We do offer that, but the state doesn't really like to send people to the reservation to be taught. And a lot of times they'll accept certain courses at the university as sort of introductory trainings toward that. But there's really no curriculum that's universal in the state of Maine, even though there's a law that requires it. And I'd have to say the curriculum that Mishi has is probably going to be your best resource at this point in time. But we're trying.
Wow, thank you, Roger.
Oh, hi, Mishi.
Finally, I feel like I walked through the desert to get back to you.
Oh. This is one of the reasons why when I set up, I'm remote teaching from my classes at Indian Island and at the university. So when I set it up this way, and I have extra screens, by the way, and I also have a battery backup. And we've already run into this last week where we had the winds coming through and the lights were flickering on and off. And I just heard my backup click a few times, but there was no glitch in my computer or my Wi-Fi either. So it's worth it to get a battery backup, I think.
That's great.
Mishi, I have a question that you might be able to answer through your education curriculum that goes along with this. But Roger was telling us stories about, and I'm paraphrasing Roger, but how there's still evidence of a colonizer's mentality. Is that fair to say? In some of the current interactions.
Settler colonial mentality, yep.
Sure.
Yeah.
Still with fishing rights, with regulations and codes and all of these different double standards and barriers that still exist. With the programs that we try to introduce in our schools with children, right? What do you think is the best way to combat that mentality? I mean, I know it's a big picture challenge, but
yeah, it's a really great question. And you're on the place we now call Cape Cod, is that correct?
it is. Well, technically I'm in Plymouth right now, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you're in Plymouth, my goodness.
I know.
It is so important for young children to become acquainted with Indigenous people who are contemporary people, who dress as contemporary people, who have all kinds of, different achievements and contributions to make. It's so easy for children, I've seen this actually in schools with little ones where, someone is brought in and they're wearing regalia from hundreds of years ago. And for the children, what that reinforces is the notion that Native people belong in the past, that they don't exist now. So I'm not criticizing the people who go into schools wearing, traditional regalia, bringing all kinds of artifacts from the past, but I think that is problematical with the little ones. And Native people are scholars about so many different things. Having someone come and meet the children who can talk to them about the life cycle of trees or plant, the reciprocal relationship between human beings and plants and trees, something like that that's in the sciences, is one way to address the fact that most of our young ones are not, we live in very segregated societies, and I think probably Plymouth and the Cape are examples of that, in spite of, Plymouth Plantation, or maybe in part because of it. So I think, and I've worked with 3rd and 4th graders around the question of boarding schools, and their teachers have actually introduced them to what we call Palmetto Comet's Resistance, or King Philip's War, in a way that's appropriate for children that age. And then we've used that as a jumping off point to explain the history of the way the state has interacted with Native families across the centuries. So little ones grasp timelines. They get chronologies. They know how to string together different historical moments and impacts. So, we can talk offline about that if you want to pursue something very specific in your classroom. I don't know if I answered your question, Nate.
I think you did, and I agree that empathy is, a key tool, in helping students understand the complexities of these issues, and not identifying everything that's not them, right, as other, and therefore just classified and treated and valued just differently. So I think,
one possibility, Nate, would be, and Roger could probably facilitate that if he wants to, if the technology supports it. How amazing would it be to have a conversation between little ones in your district and the children to whom he teaches? Because child to child.
right.
So, for example, Penobscot children at a very young age know their history in profound detail, actually. And to have children talk to children might be one way to help them overcome the settler colonial mentality that most of us have been raised with who are non-Native.
I have to interject, Michi. On paper, that is a wonderful idea, but in reality, it's been tried, and I actually dislike the idea of having to have our children be the teachers to other children, and it actually caused a lot of problems. When we go, for instance, when our children leave the elementary school and the middle school and go over to the high school, they end up having to be the teachers of the history that was not taught in their schools. And the sad
it's a
thing
huge
is that,
burden.
Yeah, and a lot of them hide the fact that they're Indian because they don't want to have to explain to every one of their white friends, why do you have a ponytail, or why do you have long hair, or why do you have to wear that bear claw or something like that? And so a lot of them will end up hiding that. So I have to interject and say that, nah, I don't want to put it on our kids to teach the non-native kids. I'd rather the non-native kids be taught by the non-native people. And the way that we can do it is workshops like this, where if we get out to the teachers and we get out to the right people, we can beat that twistery that was pervasive by John Wayne movies. And it's not that way at all. And we need to get to the teachers. We as teachers actually are part of the problem. We're the ones that help to erase the history of our entire culture. And we try to teach our young ones. And even today, everything about what goes on out there is different. I mean, even at some of the schools that don't allow you to wear an eagle feather. And of course, it's against the law to have an eagle feather, but not for Native people. Native people are given that by elders, and they wear that with pride. And if you leave the reservation with that eagle feather, you'll be surrounded by a bunch of game wardens. And then they want to know, well, where's your paper that says that you can have that? We don't give papers like that. They're given to us by elders, and we earn them. And so a lot of times, even that in and of itself is going to be difficult. I think an elder said one time it took 500 years to get here. I hope it doesn't take us that long, but it'll be pretty close to it to get back to where we need to be, back to where we're considered the equals. So I have to say that twistery is a long history. And, okay.
Thank you, Roger, for illuminating that point. And I see what you're saying. And you know, I do know that, like, one of your students, Carmela Bear, I quote her in the next teacher's guide that I'm writing. So sometimes there may be ways for non-native students to hear the words of Indigenous children without putting the burden on them to be the teachers. And maybe we have to create more instances of that. One thing I'd suggest, Nate, is the first couple of lessons in the Dawnland Teacher's Guide are very appropriate for little ones, for younger grades.
I also have to interject that I would not be a good ambassador for that. I would have to say that if you're in Plymouth, you have a very capable and very intelligent, wonderful tribe right there that should be teaching their neighbors. I ran into this at MIT when they turned to me and said, could you help us with a land acknowledgement? And I said, well, first of all, I feel weird giving a land acknowledgement because I'm in my homeland. And the other thing is the fact that this is MIT. You're in the land of the Massachusetts, which is a Wampanoag community. And I said, and you have a whole tribe of Wampanoag people right over there. That's their homeland. You should have them work with you on the land acknowledgement. So we need to remember the land with which we stand on, that we're visitors in their land, and that if we want this land acknowledgement and we want to work with them, it's the Indigenous people of that area that we should really be hearing from. Otherwise, I'd love to do it, but no, I have to honor the fact that it's Wampanoag territory. My heroes, the Wampanoag.
Well, I know we had a snafu with the connection, but we're a little bit near the bookends of the meeting. Okay. So I don't know if you wanted to leave any final thoughts or.
I just wanted to make everybody aware of the fact that, you know, we exist to serve teachers. That's our passion. That's our path. And we do it with a series of documentary films and resources for teachers. So if we'd had more time, we would have also shared First Light with you, which is very appropriate for middle and high school students. It's sort of a 13-minute introduction to the Maine Wabanaki Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the issue of the boarding schools. And we have 9 learning resources that accompany that film to make it easy for teachers to teach that material. And The first one starts with the doctrine of discovery, which might interest you, Kate, based on what I heard you say earlier about where you work. And yeah, I mean, those 9 resources, it's all freely available on the Upstander Project website. But the reason we started with the doctrine of discovery is because we have to get to the root of the ideology that led to the situation that we're in with a settler colonial society that is so bent on the continued erasure and subjugation of Indigenous peoples. So I would just recommend looking at that. And if you haven't seen our latest film, Dear Georgina, we're doing lots of screenings of that online. If you want to send me your email addresses, I now have yours, Nate, but I don't have Kate's. Then maybe, oh, I do have in the roster. Okay, I've got that. So we will add all of your names so that you have, you know, notice of when we're screening these films, and especially when the next film, Bounty, comes out next year, hopefully. What's that, Roger?
I said, I can't wait for that one.
There's going to be a whole, we talk in terms of ecosystems around our films. So there's going to be a short film, Bounty, that was actually filmed in the old State House with Penobscot families, talking about one of the scalp proclamations signed in that space in 1755. But then there's a teacher's guide. There's an electronic timeline. We hope to create a map. And there's probably going to be a play written by a Penobscot woman playwright. So, and there'll be another film about that. So we'll kind of roll it out slowly as we create things. Oh, thanks for that, Nate.
I'll put out a few links in the chat before people go.
Great. Well,
Jay, did you have a question?
No, I'm sorry. I'm dropping in later on. It's been a day, and the house was loud, so I didn't want to have my video on and mute going. So
No problem.
I appreciate what you guys are doing and sharing for all of us. And again, I apologize for coming in late to it.
No problem at all. Welcome.
Yes, this has been really wonderful, and I'm looking forward to the new film, and I'll check out the teacher's guides that you mentioned online. And I'll reach out if I have any questions.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you for hanging in there.
Yeah, and I'm in Brookline, Massachusetts, but my sister teaches 5th grade in Maine, so I'll make sure that she gets all this stuff too.
I hope it's in the Portland school system.
No, she teaches in Mount Desert.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you did mention Bar Harbor.
Yeah. So she's a 5th grade teacher there.
So it was a snowstorm that prevented me from getting to a Dawnland screening and discussion at her school.
Oh, she just started there, but yeah,
a couple of years ago. All right, friends. Well,
thank you again, both of you.
Yes, thank you so much.
And Mishi. And thank you for staying through the canceling of the Zoom conference and the rejoining and Mishi losing power, pushing through.
We're all doing our best. It's kind of metaphorical for the situation that we are all living in. So in that way, it feels quite fitting. And Nate, we are grateful to you for being our steward and not giving up on us. So, Waliwan?
Thanks.
Hey, Roger?
Waliwan. Be well, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.